The next speaker is Keith Perrett. Keith is chairman of the Grains R&D Corporation. He's also deputy chair of the Council of R&D Corporations. He also has the pleasure of being chairman of the National Rural Advisory Council. In his spare time, he tends to, and I understand quite successfully, runs 1,000-hectare property up near Gunnedah in New South Wales, where he runs not only crops but also sheep and cattle. And as a consequence, Keith is extremely well placed and has spent many years working both within and for the national grains industry in this country. Keith also has various other linkages and affiliations, including with the university sector. So it's a pleasure to welcome Keith. Keith's title is Improving R D&E through National Collaboration. Please welcome Keith.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Clive. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. To look at improving R D&E through national collaboration, we need to explore what that really means. And to do that, I'd like to focus on the grains sector and the grains strategy. So putting this very much in a grains context, and at the end of my presentation I might just touch on the PC draft report if we have time. But to get there we probably need a brief journey back through the grains industry the last 15 or 20 years, where it came from. And if we looked at the grains industry 20 years ago, it was very much a regulated industry and very much regulated along state-based lines. We had state-based marketing authorities for various grains. We had state-based handling authorities, a central storage system where most of the grain made its way through that. We did have a national marketer, but a regulated marketer. And we also had state-based research agencies, a Wheat Research Foundation or council in most states. So in the last 20 years we've seen progressive deregulation of those various entities. We've even seen consolidation across all of those industries, consolidation at the farm sector level, and even at the research level. And a classic example is wheat breeding, which was a deliberate strategy where we had 15 to 20 programs, no matter how you define them. We're now down to 3 national programs. And the other thing we've seen over the last so many years has been overseas investment in the grain sector, at the farm level, at the industry level, and even back at the research level, the breeding level, where we see 2 major investors in 2 of those wheat breeding programs. And the other thing which has been happening over the industry is what I call the slow cancer creeping up on the industry. And has not been widely recognised, unfortunately, and that is declining rates of total fact productivity growth. Productivity is not going backwards in my mind, but the growth we need to achieve is certainly not happening. So if we, and we need to put that in perspective, we need to understand the drivers of productivity, we need to understand the inhibitors of productivity if we want to go through and understand how we can improve it. And if we look at the grains industry in the current environment, world trends, we see global food security issues at the moment, population growth, less arable land, less water, climate change, climate variability, all of those things creeping up on the grains industry as it is on many agricultural industries. We see increased global competition. Former Soviet states, the area we call the Black Sea area, potentially greater competition from South America. We see growing market opportunities in our near neighbours, Asia, the Middle East, and those other ones I touched on earlier, deregulation and declining total factor productivity growth. And if we look at the drivers for change in the RD&E environment, certainly a great deal of pressure on public funding in Australia. It's something we're seeing probably on a worldwide fund as well. And I think that's because there's been a great deal of comfort in the level of food production and innovation in the agricultural sector. And also governments have other demands on their financial resources and demands that capture the voters' attention much more than agriculture. Education, health, the environment and so forth. The privatisation, globalisation of the R&D&E sector, biotechnology becoming ever more prevalent, and that climate variability, climate change, have become new priorities for research. We've identified all of these issues, along with the PISC agencies, GRDC, SYRA, and all of those various agencies to move towards a better way of delivering RD&E. Now, if I look at the old world of RD&E, a very linear model on the left. The scientist down through the field station, the deliverer of the information to the grower, and then through those previous regulated marketing and handling authorities. And if we move to the right of the screen, we can see the more complex environment we operate in today. The R zone moving into the D zone, the D zone moving into the extension zone. All those players, private, public, a changing environment. That changing environment has led to the changes that we're going to see occur progressively over the next few years. We've seen a great deal of collaboration happening over recent years. A lot of that GRDC has been able to drive subtly through our funding mechanisms, but we haven't had all of our researchers, all of our partners completely on board. The opportunity that was presented through the Primary Industries Ministerial Council, the PISC standing committees, to capture some of those, to work with some of those agencies, to look at how we can better deliver RD&E to the Australian public, but to the Australian grower, Australian governments. So where we've got to is a strategic plan, a national grains industry RD&E priorities and delivery plan. And I believe it is a true strategic plan. If the players involved can work within the plan, can cooperate, and look to the advantage that this can provide. And we start with, as you can see, the industry vision for the plan, an industry outcome, and certainly as we work down through that plan and then eventually back up through that plan, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and the way in which the strategies that we will put in place to achieve that plan. And in the middle line, where we look at the RD&E strategies and the partners, I believe that's a critical component. Building on the existing national collaboration where there is goodwill, but then taking that further, developing the effective relationship models that we need to build. So investment, and looking at investment by multinational bioscience companies, international agencies, the efficient delivery of the extension through those arrangements that were put in place with consultants and agribusiness, farming system groups, grower groups, and the state agencies, which still are a major provider of development of research, development and extension services across the grains industry. And certainly looking at those value-adding opportunities for domestic and export grains. And if we move across to look at the national research programs, we need to create a critical mass to address those national priorities and deliver the national and the regional outcomes that we're looking for. National centres of research capability to maintain the critical infrastructure that we need to grow the research capacity. Critical science disciplines and establish those links to access the international research which we desperately need to bring into the Australian systems. And then looking at the regional networks, predominantly for development, but mainly for extension, to deliver the outcomes of that research to those who are going to use it, predominantly the growers across Australia. If we look at the future of the National RD&E Plan and what specifically is GRDC's role and some of the examples of how we are now starting to see the National RD&E Plan take shape and have effect. What GRDC will be involved with our partners in developing business cases for future investments. And three examples I'd like to touch on basically to start with. The Queensland, what was formerly the Department of Primary Industries, DD, we are working with that agency and their government to look at building capacity on the Southern Downs so that we can increase the amount of physical capacity and down the track increase the amount of human capacity we have there. We are working with the University of Sydney and their Plant Breeding Institute at Narrabri, once again to put further capacity there as far as infrastructure and human resources, and to develop that even further so we can provide education, training and capacity in the human area development services. working with the WA government, DAFRA, the Department of Agriculture Food, to look at a export grain centre of excellence in WA, looking at where they have some critical mass, where they have some expertise, and certainly taking into account where the industry is at the moment. WA in the future being a major export centre as opposed to Eastern Australia, where we'll have more use of domestic grain rather than export grain. If we look at other areas where we're looking at breeding and the Pre-Breeders Alliance, we will take a lead role there. We'll develop those relationships between international deliverers of services, both public and private, and we will deliver that to the breeding companies in Australia, many of which have some state agency involvement with them. And quite critical is the extension strategy, where in the past there's been an extension strategy at a regional level, not linked as well as it could have been through to the national research capabilities. Working with the state agencies, we will deliver an extension strategy that makes sure we get the outcomes of the research, the outcomes of the development through to those growers. And we'll utilise the private and public relationships which we haven't utilised in the past, where we're seeing more and more consultants coming into the role. We will utilise those networks, tie them in with the current state agencies, and make sure we can deliver a better outcome. What do we need for success of a national strategy? We certainly need to recognise the risks of that strategy, the risks that Bruce put up in a previous slide. We need to understand what they are. I don't think they are in any means insurmountable, or to be honest, very challenging risks. If we know they're there, we will work through them, we will put in place the requirements to overcome some of those. But what the plan will need is a total ongoing commitment from all the agencies, the federal agencies, the state agencies, the universities, the CSIRO, particularly the research and development corporations, and in this case the Grains Research and Development